Hello, everybody. I hope everybody had a wonderful Thanksgiving weekend. Um, we're getting started a couple of minutes early. I didn't know if anybody wanted to chit chat about anything um, before we get into the material. I did spend the last 2 days cleaning out some stuff from our garage and came across a lot of my pictures from Iraq. I'm going to try to get those into medium that we can do kind of a separate show. I don't want to mess with our book reviews and kind of go over what the photos are and what they're about. Very interesting. Firsthand architecture, the terrain of the Kurdish area, and there's some very interesting people that are in the pictures. So I it's just funny going through that stuff. I had to take a picture of my old uniform. Um, I might try to I don't know if I can access it on here, but if I can, I will at the end. Let me make myself a note. It's funny, it's from my enlisted days. I found my evergreen identification, the um, maintenance ramp entrance where you drove your truck in. You had to have an ID to get on the Stanford Field ramp, and I found my ID for that. I don't know why I keep those things, but I did, and they're all in a box, and um, found some little carabinary statuettes made out of ceramic that a local artisan made for us in southern Italy. When we all came back from Desert Storm, um, we had a dining in of just the military people from the base because most of us had deployed over that past year. And I was in charge because I was in charge of the company grade officer council at that time. And I went to one of the local shops and had these little carabinary ceramic statues made. And they have removable little, they all have in their formal dress the plume that comes out their hat. So you take that out and they have an inappropriately placed um, area, they're whistles. So you blow on the whistle and it goes up through their body and comes out their hat and makes a whistling sound. So we brought those out and had them for everybody. And what was funny is one of my fellow company grade officers retired in North Carolina, and I had not seen in like 20 years. When we did our trip up the East Coast, we stopped both on the way up and on the way back, spent a few days with him and his wife. Her and I got our master's degree together while we were over in Italy. And they still had their carabinary little statuette on a shelf in their front room. So it's just funny going through your military history memorabilia because everything, just like everything on this wall, has a story. And when you share it with people who value and have that kind of camaraderie with you, um, it's it's lots of fun. So anyway, I will get those pictures sorted out, and if y'all are interested, I will do a separate video that just kind of goes through the history of the Kurdish area and show you firsthand pictures of the architecture and the people um, because I find it just absolutely fascinating. And I found the list of the people that were in charge of Operation Provide Comfort, which is the operation that I was directly involved in. And like General Shali Kashvili went on to be a four-star general. Um, General Garner, who was my direct boss, I was his aide and protocol person. He was a 2-star. He retired as a 3-star in charge of the Army Space Command. And General Jamerson was a 1-star. General Zinni was a 1-star. General Jamerson may have been a 2-star. General Zinni was a 1-star. I worked for him when I got to CENTCOM when he was a 4-star. So they're all in the some of the pictures. General Powell came over. I have some pictures of his visit when he came into northern Iraq. So just very interesting. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started on chapter 4. The name of chapter 4 is called Roy Cohn. It's Cohn, Cohn, Favor Bank. Um, as many of you may know, Roy Cohn and Donald Trump had quite an extensive history together. Some people even say that basically um, Roy Cohn was a mentor to um, Donald Trump and is where he got the art of the deal from because Roy Cohn is very well known for deal making in New York. And he was a huge power player, as was his father in New York City, as you're about to find out. So Roy Cohn had extensive mob ties as well. And his he was referred to as New York City's preeminent manipulator, Roy Cohn, a one man network of contacts that reached from City Hall, the mob, the press, the archdiocese, disco jet sets, courts, back rooms. He basically had his hand in everything. And he was very well known as a blackmailer as well, and regarded J. Edgar Hoover as a close associate. So Cohn passed away in 1986. Most of his FBI file still has not been released, and it is said to be over 4,000 pages in total. So his dad, and this is just a really sad story as far as I'm concerned, it's pathetic. His dad's named Albert Cohn. They immigrated from Poland. Obviously, they're Jewish. Albert Cohn, his dad, did not go to high school, yet managed to graduate from New York Law School and became a practicing lawyer in 1808. Not, excuse me, 1908. He was very involved in the Democrat Party, and at the time, it's probably largely true in New York still today. His desire was to become a judge. In New York, you couldn't be a judge unless um, you bought it for yourself, basically. You had to donate big money to the apparatus in order to become or appointed a judge. So whoever, like the governor, is appointing the state judges, or the city is appointing different judges, you had to make huge donations to the party and to the individual in order to buy your judgeship. Well, Albert wanted to be a judge, but he didn't have that kind of money because he came from a very poor background. So he made a deal with a guy by the name of Joseph Marcus. Joseph Marcus basically sold his daughter off because she um she couldn't find anybody to marry her. She was ugly, according to the book. He, Joseph Marcus was a very wealthy banking family, and he basically told Albert Cohn, "You marry my daughter, I'll buy you a judgeship." That was the deal. So, the art of the deal. So, Albert Cohn gets appointed. He marries the daughter. He gets appointed Bronx County judge by New York Governor Al Smith. They have a baby, which is Roy Cohn, and he is an only child. The A friend by the name of Ed Flynn, Flynn, is basically the Bronx Democrat Party boss, and Al Cohen becomes a protege of his. So Cohn creates a Potomac Democrat Party at Flynn's request because Flynn's rival, a guy by the name of Patrick Kane, was getting too much power. So the creation of this new, well-funded Democrat Party lessened Flynn's rival Patrick's grip on the Democrat Party. So by Roy doing this, he's basically earning brownie points or favor in the favor bank. Dora hosts all kinds of parties in Flynn's honor, and they all become loyalists to the Democrat machine. Um, Al is called on when one of the fellow Democrat operatives kill a young woman in an automobile accident. Sound familiar? And he goes down to the police station and straightens it out. So you kind of see the backroom deals. I'm not going to go into all of these details, but it's important to um, convey a few of them so that you get the understanding of how deep this network is and how the network operates. So FDR becomes New York governor, and he appoints Cohn to the Bronx Supreme Court in 1929, making him Roosevelt's first judicial appointment in the state of New York as the governor. That's how important this guy becomes. So Cohn eventually gets appointed to the state Supreme Court appellate division, again by Roosevelt. So um, there's some interaction in the 1920s with Lucky Luciano and the mob. Another mobster that's involved is Arnold Rothstein, a guy by the name of Martinelli, who has ties to the mob, owned a trucking company that was managed by Lucky Luciano during the Prohibition period. So you're kind of getting the whole feel for how long this is. And y'all have heard of Tammany Hall. Tammany Hall is a Democrat machine that's referred to that kind of is, it was very corrupt, very well known in Democrat politics in New York. Um, so you have the National Crime Syndicate, um, the Democrat Party, and the all of these people, the money, the bankers, kind of all making up this network. So the National Crime Syndicate was basically trying to rig the Democrat National Convention, shocker, in 1932 in favor of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. There were people that had warned Lansky and Costello that Roosevelt was not going to be able to do for them what his rival Al Smith was willing to do for them. And there are some indications that one party of thought is that Roosevelt did, by investigating the mob, basically turn his back on those that were rigging it for him. However, there's a whole nother uh, body of evidence that says basically what Roosevelt was doing was exactly what Nixon did, in that he wasn't prosecuting the mob in general. He was eliminating the competition of the mobsters he favored, and that's a big difference. There are credible arguments that Roosevelt was a party to eliminating this national syndicates competition. We'll leave it at that. And that, from my vantage point and what I've seen, as far as patterns go, that's my take on it. So you have Flynn basically sticking his fingers in all the different races during that period of time, and basically kind of dragging Cohn along with him as his protege. And later on, you have Flynn protecting a mob linked politician by the name of William O'Dwyer. And O'Dwyer was one of Cohn's famous family friends. The rise of William O'Dwyer, not unlike Thomas Dewey, was based on his reputation as a crusader against organized crime, including Meyer Lansky's Murder Inc. He took down the syndicate boss, Louis Burkhalter. However, it is alleged that this Burkhalter guy is one of the ones that was the competition. And Whitney goes on and says that the betrayal of Burkhalter at once removed a Lansky rival, gratified Hoover and the precursor to the DEA, the FBN director, Harry Anslinger, who we've talked about before. So you see how they kind of get brownie points for taking down a mobster when in fact all they're basically doing is um, taking out their own competition. She also says, one, if you consider that both star prosecutors had their own ties to the same syndicate, with Dewey ties to Mary Carter Paint slash Resource International, which was a mob front and a CIA front, having already been noted in chapter 1. In the case of O'Dwyer, he was meeting with Frank Costello the same year that he secured Burkhalter's death sentence. So she goes on and gives a lot more evidence of how it was basically just selectively enforced, kind of like what we see our justice system is today. It is not justice, it's selectively enforced justice to reach their ends. So, again, patterns. So, let me just trying to skip ahead because she gives a lot more evidence about how that was the case, which I don't really think we need to do that. She goes on to point out that less than a year later, O'Dwyer's right hand man, James Moran, was convicted on 23 counts of extortion for his role in the corruption that a guy by the name of McDonald had exposed. If Flynn was indeed a Bronx political boss who was free of scandal and corruption, as some historians claim, it is hard to justify why he would intervene so dramatically, directly involving the White House in order to protect the corruption that had enabled O'Dwyer. Rather, he stepped in to protect the system of unsavory alliances. There is also the fact that Roy Cohn, sorry, had been considerably involved with and worked with O'Dwyer's election campaign, bragging that he had been one of the ones who found dirt on O'Dwyer's Republican challenger. So again, just kind of tying the whole network together. So Roy Cohn was born into privilege based on his father's influence and connections, being a judge, and his mom's family, the Marcus family, being in the banking business. So she was also Dora Marcus, his mother, was very involved in the New York Jewish community, and um, their banking family later kind of gets into some scandal and controversy as it relates to their involvement in some shady Wall Street activity. But at the time, um, he was a very well-known, upstanding banker. So Joseph Marcus, her dad, is the one that created the Bank of the United States. And there's a whole bunch of names in here, and I just wanna kinda cut to the chase of that what the underlying, um, thought is behind that bank. It was originally called Public Bank of New York, and that was created in, 1906. There was a lot of controversy in New York about this bank and the name he picked. So you have to go back to the 1920s. There were tons of people coming over to the United States. The countries that they came from all had central banks. We did not. So when a foreigner came to New York and went through Ellis Island, one of the first banks they came across when they came over onto New York proper was the Bank of the United States. What do you think they thought that was? They thought that was a bank of the United States, not a private bank, not a state bank, but a national bank, one owned by the government because of the name. Well, all of the local bankers that were in the area knew when he changed the name of the Public Bank of New York to the Bank of the United States exactly what he was doing, and they went to not just New York, but they went to Congress to try to get them not to be able to name the bank that, because it was fraud, and it was. But the guy was able to get away with it because that's what happens when you have money in the favor bank, which is why Whitney cleverly labeled this, chapter the favor bank, because there's huge amounts of favor banks going on around in this book. So that's the background story on that bank. And let's see, Marcus Kolotz, Koelsch, and a business partner of Marcus named Saul Singer came together to create the Bank of the United States. So these three men, Marcus, Klotz, and Singer, all get together and basically change the name of the other bank and begin the process of defrauding the public, the new immigrants, a lot of which were Jewish at the time. And that's kind of the incredible story here is apparently Jewish people of these people, this caliber of people, not at large, have no problem defrauding each other. And you'll see that through this whole book. Um, the blackmail that happened, the banking, the real estate deals. I don't know if how many people has followed me for as far back as I did some digging up of the oligarchs in Ukraine and how they were money laundering using felt they were Jewish. they were money laundering both in Miami and in London billions of dollars. And I mean, this is recent history in the last 10 to 15 years. And one of the Jewish people that this oligarch was using in London was a rabbi, and he cheated him out of hundreds of millions of dollars of commission, and that rabbi had to sue him to get his money. And the same thing happened with some of the people that were repping him in Miami. It just to me is astonishing because you're you're supposed to be able to um, have some level of confidence when you're dealing with someone in your community, regardless of how you define that community, whether it's a religion, your neighbor, or whatever, some confidence in them not screwing you over. But evidently, that's not the case. And it's not the case in this one either. So, um, the okay, so let's see. That's just talking about when they went to the Senate to try to get them to stop using that name. The Bank of the U.S. was granted its charter by George C. Van Tull Jr., New York State Superintendent of Banks, who subsequently became a vice president and later director of the bank. So, again, this is the favor network. So, despite all of the controversy and the appeal to the U.S. government, the Bank of the United States was granted a New York State charter by a guy who evidently was promised a position as a director and eventually was hired as the vice president of that same bank. And y'all just thought this crap happened recently. So they worked to attract business and deposits from the local Jewish immigrant community. It experienced moderate growth, became 5 different branches by 1925. The Jewish ownership efforts to cater directly to Jewish people became a point of pride in the Jewish community. Legal proceedings filed against the bank in 1926, requiring an independent examination of the bank's books. The case was dismissed by State Supreme Court Judge Joseph Proskauer, allegedly because the plaintiffs had failed to make out a case. Yet doubts there were doubts of Proskauer's objectivity because he was connected to Albert Cohn. So Proskauer was appointed chair of the New York State Crime Commission when they went to look into the mob, and obviously he was owned by this same group of people. That's interesting. So the commission had been created at the behest of Governor Thomas Dewey, the New York State Crime Commission. And Dewey, remember, is the one that released Lucky Luciano from prison to go work in Operation Underworld in Sicily. And he had ties to the two Dulles brothers. So after the Crime Commission's work was completed, Dewey's former chief assistant, Paul Lockwood, in 1955 became a top executive at Louis Rosenstiel's mob-linked Shinley Industries, which we talked about in our previous chapter. Dewey himself officially became a business associate of Lansky's frontmen in 1958. So the guy that let him out of prison and deported him to Sicily eventually goes to work with him. So the Proskauer-led crime commission was insignificant in terms of its end results, and I know you guys have probably heard this too, that when they set up a commission, it's not to resolve the issue, it's to bury the issue. And that's whether it's at the state level or the federal level. Just keep that in mind. When you hear the word commission, that means it's a berry job. So Joseph Marcus had promised Albert Cohn a judgeship in exchange for his daughter marrying his daughter. The Marcus family within legal and judicial circles was very well known. Albert Cohn had been appointed as a judge in Bronx County by Al Smith a year before this case was brought against Marcus Bank in 1925. That's interesting. So Joseph Marcus dies in 1927, giving his son, Bernard Marcus, Roy Cohn's uncle Bernie, complete control over the bank's affairs. Bernie Marcus had already been intimately involved in the bank, leading up, being a part of the leadership since 1919, when his father had turned over active management of the bank to him. Bernard was named president of the bank and went on an aggressive acquisition and merger spree, growing the bank from 5 branches to 62 by 1930. The Bank of the United States becoming the third largest bank in New York City by 1929. The bank became a member of the Federal Reserve of New York, and he was greatly influenced by the Warburg brothers, who basically were in charge of the Federal Reserve. So supposedly Bernard was hailed as a financial wizard. He was great. He'd done so many great things in growing the bank. Um, so by February 1930, just months after Black Friday's stock market crash of October 1929, Bernard Marcus assured shareholders that the bank was on solid ground. A few months later, the bank began negotiating for its largest merger yet. If it would have went through, it would have resulted in the bank managing $1 billion in deposit. It was the would-be bank was to have been headed by J. Herbert Case, Case, who was then head of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, of which the Marcus-run bank was a member. In addition, Goldman Sachs was poised to have a substantial interest in this new bank that Marcus was creating. Rumors were proliferating that Marcus Rand Bank was insolvent. Who put those whispers out, I wonder? So by December 10th, over $2 million had been withdrawn, and the bank was getting a little shaky. So the police was called in because the panic set in that had spread to other banks. There was a massive sell-off, and the bank's stock went from $91 the previous year to $3 a share. The merger fell through. The superintendent of banks, Joseph Broderick, attempted a rescue of the bank. The governor of New York at the time was FDR. He ordered the Bank of the United States closed, which made its failure the largest U.S. Bank failure in history at that time. It became readily apparent that Bernard Marcus and Paul Singer, the bank's vice president, had engaged in illegal activity purchasing bank stocks with depositors' fund in order to drive up the stock price. They had loaned out over $37 million under suspicious circumstances, including $10 million in mostly unsecured loans to bank directors and their companies, plus $5.5 million in loans to 16 insolvent subsidiaries of the banks in the months leading up to the collapse. Marcus and Singer also raided the bank's reserves to finance their own investments in real estate market. Now I'm going to stop here for just a second because I want to make a point for everybody. When you see these bank failures like we saw when we were reading the book about Castle and Helliwell's bank where he was doing the money laundering. I just want to say this because I say it every time, stomp my feet, hit my desk. They own these banks, number one, for money laundering. Part of the money laundering, because of their fractional lending, is they will take the let's just say I'm money laundering 10 million a day, and that's not unheard of in this bank. So on any one day, I have 10 million. Well, I can loan out for every $1 I have, I can loan out another $9. I do that without any collateral on those loans, and I do it to my friends. So anytime anybody's going to come look, I got 10 million. So I meet the requirement for loaning that money out. But one day, I'm going to take that 10 million out and I'm going to let that bank collapse. But meanwhile, those other 9 hundred million that I've loaned out for the one or whatever the 9 billion that I've loaned out. I don't do math in public, sorry. Um, that money's on the market. I didn't use any collateral, so they don't have to pay it back. And that's another way of black market funding for them. Then they turn around and they put that loaned money into real estate that they collateralize with themselves. It's just not held by the bank. It's another way for us. And then they use our money to bail those banks out. So every time you hear about this FDIC bullshit, that's what it is. That is yes, just another way. And oh, well, it's self-funded. Well, it's self-funded from banks paying a tax that they're charging you fees for to put in their little kitty to give you pennies on the dollar of what they're money laundering. So just wanted to let you know about that too. So they're going to have public hearings because of this bank default. And immediately the officers at the bank start burning truckloads of documents. Again, patterns. So they had bought an apartment building that had an incinerator. So they took all of their records to the apartment building and started burning them there. Marcus fought the investigation of his bank bitterly, even going so far as to refuse to testify. Marcus and Singer were eventually found guilty of fraud. They were sentenced to 3 years in maximum security, and their appeal was unsuccessful. The reason the other banking chieftains of New York had declined to step in to rescue the bank, so they got accused, the other bankers, of anti-Semitism. Yet most of the other banks, other than JP Morgan, were owned by fellow Jewish people. So I'm not sure how you get to be an anti-Semite when you are a Semite, but that's a technicality. Um, so it is more likely, she points out, that the fraud of the Bank of the United States was just too enormous for the German Jewish banking establishment to tolerate against mostly Jewish depositors. And that is true. I mean, they targeted the Jewish immigrants in this bank. So, but I just find it interesting that that was the first accusation is they're anti-Semites for not bailing the bank out. No, you could have just not stole all the money. Okay. Bernard Marcus was pardoned after just 27 months in prison by Herbert Lehman when he was serving as the New York governor. Lehman had been one of the judges presiding over Marcus's appeal and was the only one who had argued for the convictions to be overturned. Huh, so much for being an anti-Semite. Lehman, who hailed from the German Jewish Lehman Brothers banking family, was close to Albert Cohn, lobbied who had lobbied Lehman to grant the pardon. Another favor bank. Lehman's and the rest of the German Jewish banking establishment had indeed sought to destroy Marcus. It is high, if they just wanted to destroy him, it's unlikely that Lehman would have intervened and basically pardoned him. So had nothing to do with that, obviously. Uh, let's see. So supposedly that had a big negative impact on Roy Cohn because he was very close to his uncle Bernie. And he felt like um, Bernard Marcus had become a scapegoat, like an offering, if you will, among the den of thieves of the rest of the Jewish bankers up there. So on Roy Cohn's maternal side, his maternal grandmother, Celia Cohn Marcus, was the sister of Joshua Lionel Cohen, born Cohen, who co-founded Lionel Corporation, the model railroad and train company. The origins of the prominent toy company lie in Cohen's work for Acme Electric Light Company. He began registering patents for lamps and motors in 1899. And just so that y'all know, Cohen spelled Cowen and Cohen Cohen and Cone Cohn are all the same family. The origins of the prominent toy company lie in Cohen's work for Acme Electric. Okay. Cohen was awarded a $12,000 contract from the U.S. Navy to design and manufacture fuses to ignite submarine mines. He used the money to finance the creation of Lionel Corporation in 1900. Cohen is best known for his long time serving as president of Lionel Corporation, the toy company. He was also a director on the Bank of the United States at the time of its demise. That's interesting. While his nephew went to Sing Sing, Cohen managed to get off light through the help of Fred Piderit, Piderit. He was a special deputy banking superintendent charged with overseeing the liquidation of the Bank of the United States. Piderit's son later became a prominent fixture in New York Federal Reserve. Cohen ultimately settled for $5,000 fine for him having sat on the board while all the fraudulent activity was going on. Cohen's avoidance of charges in the case further weakens the theory that the prosecution of Bernard Marcus over the bank's collapse was a plot to get the family because they were Jewish bankers. Lionel's influence grew and peaked in the early 1950s when it became the world's largest toy manufacturer. Cohen and his son Lawrence stepped away from the company, selling their shares to none other than Roy Cohn. Cohn's involvement with and the role at the company would subsequently be linked to suspect financial activity and organized crime networks, including former Congressman Neil Gallagher, having alleged that Roy persuaded friends and acquaintances to buy Lionel stock while he was privately shorting them, making him rich and screwing his friends. Cohn also sidestepped federal regulations in the 1950s by borrowing large sums from U.S. and foreign sources to buy Lionel stock. Whew, gosh, that seems like a common denominator in all of this is how I can make myself rich and screw everybody else. But at the same time, maintain my footing in this web of den of thieves. It's just crazy. So, also, there were rumors that his maternal grandmother, Cecilia Cohen Marcus, was deranged and suffering from mental issues. And one of his uncles, Jesse Marcus, was also mentally retarded or brain damaged um, from birth. So many people thought that Roy Cohn's mother also should have been institutionalized. And Whitney, um, at length goes through the issues of um, how unhappy the family was between Dora and Albert, and how Roy was brought up in this and basically playing one against the other. Very dysfunctional family. Um, we don't need to go into all of the details that she did, but just know that it was a really bad family. Um, so Roy Cohn used this as basically the basis for his deal making, like playing his parents off of each other. And it also, she says that um, he used his father's connections to get men jobs at the post office for a finder's fee when he was still just a kid. So he was doing this from a very young age. He had very few friends, basically two. Um, uh, Cy Newhouse Jr., who, uh, when he was an adult, was he owned the empire called Condé Nast, Nast Empire, that included Vanity Fair, Vogue, GQ, and The New Yorker, and several other publications. And another guy by the name of Edwin Weisel. Is it Weisel? Yeah, Weisel Jr., who became Assistant Attorney General under Lyndon B. Johnson. Um, his father, the junior, father, was a prominent lawyer in the movie business, and he also hung around with Generoso or Gene Pope Jr., who eventually ran the National Enquirer. And we know that the National Enquirer guy was friends with Donald Trump as well. Cohn's aunt Libby Marcus stated that Roy had very few contemporary friends when he was a little boy. The Generosa Pope Jr. and Eddie Weisel Jr. was at all of his events, his birthday parties, whatever. So we're going to call him Gene. Like Roy, had an insatiable interest in politics. So he hung out with Gene Pope Sr., who was an immigrant who had came to the US from Italy, basically penniless, but then eventually went on to own the biggest concrete industry in the entire New York City, New York, and some people say in the whole United States. It was like an empire. Um, he very much was in love with Mussolini and fascism, and had ties to the Vatican and New York top mobsters, was close to the William O'Dwyer guy that we just talked about. Um, he also was close to Roosevelt and Harry Truman and Thomas Dewey. So he was the got around. Um, Pope Sr., Gene Pope Sr., had mob ties, was close to Frank Costello. Um, so Colonial Sand and Stone was the concrete business that Pope Sr. ended up building that did all of that business. Yeah, and it says that Colonial ends up the largest concrete company in the country, and he became one of the wealthiest legitimate businessmen with ties to organized crime. So it says, so close were the ties that Costello, who was the real life inspiration for Vito Corleone in The Godfather, was chosen to be Gene Pope Jr.'s actual godfather, which and all of y'all know that in the Catholic religion, the godfather thing is a huge big deal. So that's pretty dang close. If you're the godfather if you have the mobster guy as your kid's godfather. Oh my gosh. Um, so Gene Jr. did psyops for the CIA. He got a loan from Costello to construct his own media empire around the National Enquirer. Gene Pope Jr.'s son, Paul Pope, described Costello's influence on his family as the guardian angel. Sure. So you see the kind of empire that we're building, and she does a great job of kind of tying all these people together. The media, psyops, um, and the mob, them they have CIA ties, so you can kind of just see the foundation, since we're talking about concrete, being built here for where we're going in this book. So, um, where else? Roy Cohn's oddly cozy relationship with J. Edgar Hoover, described in chapter 2, was the deciding factor in Cohn's appointment as Joe McCarthy's chief counsel when he was doing his anti communist hearings. The position had nearly gone to Robert F. Kennedy, who was a lifelong bitter rival of Cohn's, with Kennedy attempting to nail Cohn on more than one occasion when he was the attorney general during JFK's presidency. Cohn was ruthless and seemingly untouchable as McCarthy's counsel. He played a pivotal role in destroying careers around the red and lavender scares. His downfall after he attempted to blackmail the army in return for preferential treatment for committee consultant and his rumored lover, David Shine, Schine. Shortly after Shine became involved with Cohn and McCarthy, his sister, Renee Shine, married Lester Crown. Lester Crown was the future guy in charge. He was a member of the mega group and son of the super mob Henry Crown that we talked about in chapter 1. Whew, such a small family. Cohn's failed power play with the army was his most well known attempt to use blackmail during this period. He was also known to use blackmail on various targets, such as diplomats like Charles Thayer, the U.S. Consul General in Munich, Germany. Thayer's brother in law, Charles Bolin, was nominated for ambassadorship by Eisenhower. Both Thayer, but especially Bolin, were hated by the McCarthyite right. Thayer had produced a son with a Mexican woman whom he had briefly married and then divorced. Cohn threatened to inform Thayer's aged mother about the affair, and basically, he chose to resign from the State Department instead of embarrassing his mom. So, Cohn definitely is not afraid of using blackmail. Um, so, Cohn also used blackmail that was obtained by other means, given that he had already become involved in the Rosenstiel linked sexual blackmail operation. We talked about that in chapter 2. If you want to go back and if you haven't listened to chapter 2, Rosenstiel and J. Edgar Hoover, Cohn, they had a room set up at the Plaza Hotel in New York City that was wired and had cameras everywhere where they enticed people to come in. It's called the Blue Suite. And there are witness statements as to having been in there where grown men, homosexuals, were having sex with each other. And they would bring in what appeared to be very young men to engage in that sex as well. So here they're saying that the alleged ties to the anti-communist hunt and its apparent target, homosexual men, were also being hunted due to this so-called lavender scare. Lavender scare was a concern that closeted homosexuals were vulnerable to blackmail. Well, hello. And so they used that against them. So you have Cohn and Hoover, both are alleged homosexuals that are using homosexuality to blackmail others. And Hoover's FBI and the Catholic Church, dominated by Cohn's pal, Cardinal Spellman, that was originally backed and legitimized McCarthy and his now infamous witch hunt, of which Cohn was part of. So, like Hoover, Cardinal Spellman, the Archbishop of New York from 1939 until his death in 67, was incredibly powerful. You couldn't get a job in New York without Spellman's okay. It had to be cleared by him. He controlled everything with an iron fist, the city council, the legislature, everything. And he was a control freak. Spielman's double life not only allegedly involved his visits to the Blue Suite at the Plaza Hotel, but included private sex parties at his mansion. Spielman's biographer, John Cooney, had to acknowledge Spielman's private life, writing, quote, "In New York clerical circles, Spielman's sex life was a source of profound embarrassment. There were stories about him securing altar boys and choir boys. He had his favorite among handsome young priests and was known to have lovers outside the clergy." Unquote. One interesting anecdote shared by Cooney relates to a choir boy who had a relationship with Spielman who was particularly vocal about it. Evidently, he went around talking about it. It seemed that Spielman was confident, so confident in his power that it didn't matter to him, that no one was going to say anything about him, regardless of this younger person going around bragging about the fact that they were engaged in a sexual relationship. Spillman and Hoover apparently had similar connected private lives that carried the risk of exposure, but not if you're in charge of the very um, elements of power that would be doing the exposing. So you had, she also makes the case where you have Alan Dulles who used some of that information to get what he wanted from FDR. And then you had FDR, or not FDR, Hoover, but you also had Hoover with a file on Alan Dulles. So they kind of checked each other there on, um, because evidently Alan Dulles was very well known for having adulterous relationships all over. So Dulles also compiled a lengthy dossier on Joe McCarthy's sex life, where there were also allegations of homosexuality, because evidently he wasn't married, which I didn't know. At the time, he was a bachelor of 43 years. And so there were allegations that he too was part of this whole um, unseemly group. Um, Hoover's secret files were alleged to contain a series of disturbing stories of McCarthy's drunkenly groping young girls as well. So, whether, and also there were allegations of statutory rape. So, who knows? But obviously, they used blackmail, whether they actually were just trying to incriminate McCarthy as part of his trying to get rid of communists, or he was in fact dirty. At this point, I don't know. She provides allegations and quotes from each side of that. I don't know. So let's see. Combs and Shine's European tour was reported. So this Shine guy is kind of an interesting aspect to Roy Cohn. He was a lot younger, and they evidently not only hung out all the time in Washington, D.C. together, but they went on a European tour together. And it was reported all over Europe that they were flirting with each other. When they traveled, they had to have adjoining rooms. And one time when he came into DC and they couldn't get adjoining rooms, evidently they had a meltdown in the lobby that they weren't going to have adjoining rooms. So that's gross. At the very least, even if there was no relationship, the evidence points to Cohn having been enamored with Shine to the point that he was willing to aim the full force of McCarthy's machine squarely at the army after Shine had been drafted in 1953 but was due to ship out overseas. Cohn got so mad that they drafted his uh, friend that he threatened the army. He said that he was going to ruin the army if they didn't undraft him. So that didn't happen. Um, there were hearings, and this basically ended McCarthy's anti communist um, hunt. It humiliated Cohn to the extent that it would overshadow him for the rest of his life. And it also ruined the relationship that he had with the kid. So I guess that's what happens when the blackmail goes awry, when you try to strong arm the army. After the end of McCarthyism, Roy Cohn returned to New York, and thanks to Judge David Peck, he joins a very high profile law firm in 1957. Peck was a close friend of Roy's father and associate of Thomas Dewey. So Peck also was a lawyer for Sullivan and Cromwell, which is where the Dulles brothers are from. And the Sullivan and Cromwell eventually becomes Sachs, Bacon, and Bolin. No, the Sachs, Bacon, and O'Shea becomes Sachs, Bacon, and Bolin. And basically, once Cohen starts working there, he's kind of the a force to be reckoned with while he's there. So she goes on and talks a little bit more about how Cohn really did not like Bobby Kennedy, didn't really like JFK, um, really, really liked Lyndon B. Johnson. The Kennedys were not so easily thwarted. The feud became worse and particularly dangerous for Cohn. Cohn sought refuge in his powerful connections in organized crime. The same year John Kennedy won the presidential election, Cohn was a guest of honor at the New Year's Eve party hosted by Mo Dalitz, which is the Ohio mobster. And he was on the Jewish side of the mob. So Cohen had also began engaging in illegal financial schemes involving Lionel, his uncle company. Cohen's control over Lionel had been arranged with the help of Los Angeles accountant Eli Boyer, who was also part of the mob. Cohen initially attempted to smooth things over with the Kennedy, writing a letter saying that he harbored no ill will. but he got mad that Bobby Kennedy was going to be named Attorney General and felt like there was going to be a Get Roy Cohn team put together. So he was convinced that Robert Kennedy did create a Get Roy Cohn team. And supposedly Robert Morgenthau was also part of the Robert Kennedy Get Roy Cohn. And Roy Cohn was charged in 3 different cases with crimes during that tenure, um, and was found, let's see, he was found not guilty on all 3 of those cases, not because he was not guilty, but because of this network, um, and I don't necessarily wanna go into all of the, cases. It's just a good, um, precursor to some things that are going to happen to know that, um, Cohn is definitely involved in the mob. Um, Even if he was very clever about it in not, um, being able to, uh, be proven guilty. So, one of the ways he did it was he figured out a way to get one of his attorneys, thrown off his case so that he could become his own attorney without testifying, but yet he gave like a 7-hour closing statement, which basically was his testimony that couldn't be questioned because there was nobody there, because he was acting as his own attorney, not himself. That's how clever this guy was. So just throwing that out there. It's crazy the stories. Um, so let me get skip ahead here to um, his third trial had to do was with the Fifth Avenue Coach Lines case and saw Cohn accused of bribery, conspiracy, and filing false reports to the SEC. And he basically he basically did that. Um, but and there were loans made. Um, there was also in this particular case a Mossad linked smuggling of weapons through Belgium by a Belgium Israeli dual citizen that was business partners with one of the people that Cohen was in business with. So it's crazy. Um, okay, enough about that. One of the many things that Roy Cohen and J. Edgar Hoover shared was having Robert Kennedy as an enemy. Hoover also subverted the Kennedy led effort to get Roy Cohen by passing Cohen the government's case against him on at least one occasion. So let that sink in. The guy that's in charge of the FBI doesn't like his boss, Robert Kennedy. So he gives a criminal, alleged criminal, the case that Robert Kennedy has against him to the guy so he knows how to best defend himself. This our government is so messed up. But instead of his let's see. All right. Hunting Kennedy demanded some ingenuity. For the target was this was what Hoover's strategy was. For the target was clean on money and far cleaner on sex than his brother. In short, not an easy one to bring down. They're trying to bring down Bobby Kennedy. One approach might be to embarrass him with his liberal constituencies and depict him as a ruthless attorney general indifferent to the Bill of Rights and individual liberty. Roy was needed as a membrane of protection for the director. Others were needed, including Congressman Gallagher, who was making a reputation for himself as a civil libertarian, a a legislator committed to preventing the government from turning from itself by aid of computer lie detectors and advanced electronics into a big brother entity. Well, if that was his worry, then he failed. So Cohn called him up, Neil Gallagher, and basically says about some real substantive abuses that are going on in the United States, unquote, and that he needed him to have some congressional hearings about these abuses. And he was going to basically accuse Robert Kennedy of abusing his office. So at the time, Robert Kennedy instructed his Justice Department to target Cohn. He had also had his sights set on organized crime heads of Teamsters Union, Jimmy Hoffa, meaning that the Teamsters had their own score to settle. At a meeting with Zagri had brought him a trove of documents aimed at Bobby Kennedy, the IRS, and was going to use that Kennedy was using against them. He wanted Gallagher to host hearings on the material. Gallagher asked how he had acquired those dangerous documents. So supposedly Gallagher was told, "Don't worry about it. You're just going to use them." But Gallagher wouldn't use them. Cohn then called Gallagher the next day and said, "You made a big mistake." Gallagher responded by saying that he was not going to commit because he was unsure of the document's authenticity. So Cohen says, "Oh, they're authentic. They all come from J. Edgar Hoover's office. Mr. Hoover will consider it a personal favor if you chair these hearings." So Gallagher says that he wanted to stay out of that battle. He did not want to get in the middle of it, stating, "I don't agree with what Bobby's doing. I think it's terrible. I don't agree with what Hoover's doing. It's even worse." Cohn promised that if Gallagher did host those hearings, that both Hoover and the Teamster boss, Jimmy Hoffa, would shower him with favors. When Gallagher refused, he says, "You're gonna be sorry. I don't know how the FBI, work. If you're not their friend," he knows how they work. "If you're not their friend, you're their enemy." Sounds like Chuck Schumer. Cohn repeated the same thing to Gallagher a second time. He even went so far as to prepare a letter for Gallagher's signature. And said that, let's see, that demanded the attorney general at the time appear before a congressional committee with the authorizations for the illegal bugging of civil rights activist Martin Luther King. Gallagher asked who had produced the letter for him to sign. His secretary told him Roy Cohn had. Cohn, when contacted by Gallagher, asserted that Hoover had dictated that letter because he was sick and tired of Bobby Kennedy. So again, Gallagher declined to do anything with them. And he was told again, "You're going to be sorry. I told you before, if you're not their friend, you're their enemy. They're going to get you." Hoover made good on that threat, and in 1968, he leaked a story to Life magazine. And keep in mind, Life magazine was owned by the Luce couple who were Knights of Malta. We've already investigated them. And they're part of the CIA. Life magazine that tied Gallagher to mobster Zoe Ziccarelli in the middle of Gallagher's reelection campaign. The story relied on transcripts of taped conversations allegedly between Gallagher and Zeccarelli, whose organized criminal activities were in arms smuggling, was being discussed on the tapes. The FBI later denied the authenticity of these recordings, with the FBI only denying their validity to avoid admitting that they had illegally wiretapped Gallagher. Gallagher had long been friendly with Cohen, and the Ziccarelli tie is not outside the realm of possibility as far as it being factual. However, the story in life is a bit odd for several reasons. It failed to establish any benefit to Gallagher from his alleged dealings with the mafia. Gallagher had asked for the mafia's help in disposing of it did say that Gallagher asked help in disposing of a dead body, yet Gallagher was not accused of killing the person. The person appeared to have died from natural causes, no foul play. Gallagher would not have called a doctor. Why he would not have called a doctor or a policeman makes no sense. Gallagher's criticism of the FBI and Justice Department wiretaps were mainly motivated by his purported alliance with the mafia figures. The FBI itself was later revealed to have been the source of the accusation detailed in the Life article. Hoover's own conflicts of interest relating to organized crime would be taken with a grain of salt. Gallagher claimed that he, again, threatened by Hoover with Roy Cohn, again serving as the conduit. Gallagher was told that he had to resign or some sensational story would be published. So basically, Gallagher tells his constituents exactly what happened, and he got reelected. He won his reelections, but in 1972, he was indicted for perjury and tax evasion. He was later quoted as saying, "The contracts that were daily made by important parts of the United States media on these kinds of deals without any recourse as to the hell that they were really building up has become part and parcel of why we don't have a GD presidential candidate around anymore. Dot, dot, dot. You know, it's okay to talk about these things, but information is controlled, and the bastards, i.e., men like Hoover, have the information, and they use guys like Roy as their interlopers." So that's just crazy. Okay, so we move on. Cohn served Hoover politically through various means, including acting as his intermediary in political battles and other struggles. Both allegedly had blackmail material on each other and others via the Plaza Hotel Blue Suite parties. The evidence of Cohn and Hoover participating in the blackmail rackets alongside Louis Rosenthal and Sherman Kaminsky, which we've talked about before. There's also information about Cohn and Hoover having ties to another sexual blackmail scandal in the 1960s. This one took place in the United Kingdom and was referred to as the Profumo affair. The key link between Hoover, Cohn, and the Profumo affair was a man by the name of Thomas Corbally, who used Cohn as a conduit to pass inside information on that scandal to Hoover as it was unfolding. Corbally came from a family of private investigators. Corbally's family used their detective agency to benefit organized crime, which included spying on federal agents in the 20s and 30s. Thomas Corbally served in World War II, and surprise, he was in the OSS. So basically, he's a CIA guy. Corbally does appear to have served in the intelligence during the war, But in military intelligence, which is the CIC, which we know from our investigation that they worked hand in hand with the OSS. So, regardless of which of those entities, um, a lot of the CIC people went to work for the CIA. In 1950s, Corbley became a jet-setting private detective who was working for the rich and famous. He met and befriended Roy Cohn. Cohn served as Corbley's attorney over the years, and in 1960s, Corbley began living in London, sharing an apartment with William Mellon Hitchcock. Yes, Mellon, as in wealthy Mellon family, Mellon. Mellon Hitchcock was the former in-law of David Bruce, an OSS station chief and close ally of William Casey. William Casey of the OSS, who becomes the CIA director. During the time Corbley and Mellon Hitchcock shared an apartment in London. Bruce, i.e., David Bruce, was the U.S. ambassador to the UK. So Mellon moves over while his former in-law, David Bruce, is the U.S. ambassador to the UK. So Mellon Hitchcock is living with Corbley. They start throwing wild parties and orgies for the elite. At the same time, Corbley is working with organized crime networks in the UK, one of which was Irish gangster Johnny Francis, who later facilitated the entry of Philadelphia mob boss Angelo Bruno into various businesses in London. One of those included Colony Sports Club, where Meyer Lansky associate and DC mobster Joe Nessline had a significant stake. Both Bruno and Francis worked closely with Ronnie and Reggie Cray. They're twin brothers and nightclub owners who ran a London-based organized crime gang known as the Firm for well over a decade. Stephen Snyder and Douglas Thomas, who wrote about the Cray brothers, quote, were known to have supplied rent boys, i.e., teenage boys, to Lord Boothby, a conservative MP and former Churchill aide, during the time they were associated with Johnny Francis. A declassified MI5 document reveals that British intelligence was aware of the Boothby Cray association, including the sex parties and the rent boys, because of course they would use it for blackmail material. They also referred to Boothby and Ronnie Cray as hunters of young men. Corbley was also a member of the Claremont Club, which was an elite group of gamblers in London in the 1960s. Claremont members became extremely powerful during the government of Margaret Thatcher. Several members had close ties to Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell's father, and were involved in the global arms trade. The Claremont Club was opened by a guy by the name of John Aspinall, who had a very exclusive casino as well. And of course, we know all of the casinos are ran by mob people, which Whitney points out. The Claremont Club was written about in a book called The Mayfair Set, acted as a catalyst for the formation of power nexus around a series of powerful businessmen, politicians that were in office during Margaret Thatcher's tenure, and At the center of this was a guy by the name of David Sterling, Sir James Goldsmith, Roland Walter Rowland. Goldsmith later employed Thomas Corbly directly. Lord Boothby was also a member of the Claremont Club. And just so that you know, this tends to follow a pattern. Like back in the day when we were talking about when the fascists and the Round Table was created in the um, late 1800s, they had dinner clubs. So they formed these social clubs to do crazy weird things, but they also use them as social contacting points in order to do businesses, like illegal business, like arms deals. So Sterling and Rowland both have ties to Aiden Khashoggi, who was an international arms dealer, who later became a client of Ray Cohn. So they the Sterling and Rowland was also involved in the Iran-Contra operation, and they were both members of Claremont Club. Goldsmith not only had ties to Maxwell, but also white collar crime links to people like Charles Keating, Michael Milken, and Jeffrey Epstein. So Keating and Milken were both part of the savings and loan scandal of the 1980s, which basically is another bank failure that had a lot to do with what I've already covered as far as the bank failures go. So they also were in close collaboration with both CIA and organized crime. Another member of the Claremont Club was Jack Dellal, Dellal, whose family business later backed Christine Maxwell's Homeland Security focused software venture, Chiliad. That's Robert Maxwell's other daughter, besides, I think there's three of them. That's another one of them. This one was involved in software. So, in the context of Corbly and the Profumo affair, there's another important member of the Claremont Club. His name was Stephen Ward. Ward was part of the British aristocracy and was he knew W. Averell Harriman. So Harriman was the former governor of New York and was part of the Brown Brothers Harriman and Company financial empire that was entangled in Nazi Germany. Harriman's bank employed George H.W. Bush's father, Prescott Bush, and his maternal grandfather's father, George Herbert Walker. He was promoting Ward Harriman. Let's see. At the time that he was promoting Ward, Harriman was the ambassador at large of the Kennedy State Department. So, you also have involved in this whole nefarious affair Lord Louis Mountbatten, Prince Philip's uncle and mentor to Prince Charles. Nahum Ward and Lord Mountbatten were attendees at the Thursday Club, which is just like the Claremont Club. Nahum is said to have founded the Thursday Club. Others attended included Prince Philip and the Cray twins. Many of the attendees of the Thursday Club dinners were involved in sex parties. So Nahum became a regular host at these parties at his apartment in Piccadilly. Some of them featured girls dressed only in Masonic aprons at the sex parties. Because, that's just completely normal. Ward regularly attended Nahum's sexually explicit get-togethers as well as other events hosted by the elite British society. So we also know that Lord Mountbatten was a pedophile. So I'm just going to throw that in there. Ward's talents were quickly recognized by British intel because he's having sex parties. So, hello, we want pictures so we can blackmail everybody. So, we get MI5 and MI6 involved in this. And during the 1960s, when Corbally and the Claremont Club were being established in London, British politician John Profumo, who was then serving as the UK Secretary of State for War, met a woman by the name of Christine Keeler, Keeler. Keeler was 19 years old and a model. Oh gosh, that sounds like Jeffrey Epstein, who lived with Stephen Ward. She began having an affair with Profumo shortly after they met. Keeler was simultaneously having an affair with a guy by the name of Eugene Ivanov, who was a Soviet military attaché or GRU agent in London. Ward allowed Keeler and Ivanov to use his apartment during the course of their affair. Ivanov also had ties to Ward because Ward was acting as a back channel between the UK government and the Soviet Union during the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. So, da, da, da. Ivanov was working Ward and trying to get Ward to be basically like a double agent. Keeler later asserted that Ward was a double agent. Incidentally, Ward also was close to the Astor family and rented a cottage from them. And this is where it gets really interesting. Now, keep this in mind. We're on the Astor family estate, Cliveden, and Profumo, the war secretary, and Keeler first meet here. So Ward has some crazy ass parties at the Astor family estate. The scandal began only after Keeler told Labor Secretary John Lewis that she was having affairs with both Ivanov and Profumo. Lewis subsequently informed Profumo's political enemy, Labor MP George Wigg. Wigg, like Ward, was a British asset. Intel. So between her testimony to Lewis and via Lewis to Wigg, Keeler also told her story to the British press, causing a huge scandal. Profumo, the war secretary, resigns. And basically, the Macmillan government is destroyed. So, as an Whitney points out, as an aside, Macmillan, who is the prime minister at the time, Macmillan's wife was allegedly in a long-term adulterous relationship with Lord Boothby, the guy we were just talking about that's a member of the Claremont Club. Wife swapping anybody? So just a complete crazy, it's like the entire government of the UK was a whorehouse. That's kind of the short of it. It's crazy. To include all the upper echelons of the aristocrat population over there as well. So, it was David Bruce, William Mellon Hitchcock's former in-law and the UK ambassador for us, and former OSS station chief, who involved Corbally directly into the Profumo affair. Bruce was asked by Macmillan to uncover the truth surrounding Profumo's relationship with Keeler, and Bruce turned to Corbally for information due to Corbally's relationship with Ward. His profession as a private detective, and because he was closely, he had a friendship with Mellon Hitchcock. So, Some other authors asserted that it was Ward himself who had dropped in on Corbally and Mellon Hitchcock, where he confessed everything to them and begged them for help in preventing Keeler's story from going public. Whatever the details, Mellon Hitchcock ultimately met with David Bruce's assistant, Alfred Wells, and told Wells how the incidents at the heart of the Profumo affair transpired. At least a month prior to that meeting, and apparently before Keeler had revealed the affair to John Lewis, both Corbally and Mellon Hitchcock had known about Profumo and Keeler via Ward. Bruce's role in these meetings with Wells seemed odd, as he sat on the inside information of the affair despite its security implications to the U.S. State Department and Anglo American establishment. Hoover's FBI got the inside scoop from Corbally and began investigating the other women of interest in the Stephen Ward circle while the Profumo affair was just beginning. Corbally kept the FBI informed on what was going on through Roy Cohn, Corbally's longtime friend and attorney. In the public release of the FBI files on the affair, nicknamed the Bow Tie Dossier, the information that Cohn gave to the FBI is entirely censored, as is a 17-page interview with the FBI that the FBI had with Corbally. So, one of the reasons for these redactions likely owes to the ties between the other women associated with Stephen Ward and the efforts to blackmail sexually JFK. And that's probably a good point because I'm going to read some stuff to you about that, but I want to say this up front. In all of the research that I've done, one of the people that supposedly had sex with JFK was a CIA, a high up CIA's wife. And when she died mysteriously, somebody came in and sanitized the she was like in a cottage when she died, not the main house, and they sanitized it. They took her diary, they took everything. There are a lot of people that believe that JFK was not as sexually promiscuous as people have after the fact asserted he was, as a way to try to minimize who he was, um, or to basically tear down his character. There are a lot of people that believe the people that said they had sex with him didn't necessarily have sex with him and were part of a CIA sting to, and I don't know if that's true, but I have read in two different very um, in-depth JFK um, research books that there's a lot of open-ended questions around several of those women. I'll just leave it at that. So, um, what's said in here, and this is an excerpt out of a book called Deep Politics and the Death of JFK, and I'm just going to read this. It's a quote out of that book. Meyer Lansky had, by the 1930s, acquired compromising evidence of Hoover's homosexual activities. In the 1950s, Meyer Lansky and other mob figures such as Sam Giancana supplied women to JFK, some of whom were logged into Hoover's growing files of dirt on the young senator. In the 1960s, this deep political equilibrium was threatened by Robert Kennedy's war against organized crime, which alienated Hoover. Feeling increasingly threatened, especially after the Kennedys began to collect their own files on Hoover, both Hoover and the mob began to escalate their collection on the Kennedys. At first, Hoover gained White House influence by protecting the Kennedys against mob blackmail, but in 1963, Hoover, desperate, began to leak some of his own dirt on the Kennedys to the public. Hoover's sexual dirt on the Kennedys began to surface in the late June 1963. After the president's peace speech at American University with its appeal, quote, "Let us re-examine our attitude toward the Cold War," unquote. On June 20th, the US and the Soviet Union signed an agreement establishing a hotline between the Kremlin and the White House. Now, I'm going to say this right now with what I just read to you. What happened to every other president or prime minister in every other country as soon as they reached a handout to the Soviet Union? They got couped, right? So you're telling me that the sexual dirt starts getting released on Kennedy when he reaches his hand out to the Soviet Union, and that dirt is released by JFK, or excuse me, uh, J. Edgar Hoover. So it is just as likely that that dirt is made up BS. Back to the quote. A week later, there was a flurry of veiled hints linking the president to the Profumo story, such as the Drew Pearson Jack Anderson column, Jack Anderson's CIA, for June 29th. Quote, British who read American criticism of Profumo throw back the question, what high American official was involved with Marilyn Monroe? Question mark, unquote. Do you see what I mean? So the FBI setting JFK up. On the same day, in a front page story, the Hearst paper, again CIA, in New York, the Journal American linked Christine Keeler, Stephen Ward, sex ring in itself to a high U.S. aide, one of the biggest names in American politics. Back in the 1960s, after his election, but before his inauguration, the president had slept with two members of the ring, including Mariella Novate, a former stripper in the London's club Pigalle. So again, these are all innuendos, all put out there by the FBI and or the CIA. So this Mariella Novotny was born Stella Marie Capes, and she met Stephen Ward through her job as a stripper at the Mayfair nightclub called the Black Sheep. The owner of the club, Horace Divins, was a friend of Ward's, who also had interest in all of his sex parties. The sex parties also had an occult element to them, black magic and men in masks, ritual sadomasochism, slave master dynamics, and all of these same people were involved in occult themed sex parties. Novotny was subsequently whisked away from London to New York, where she began working as an upscale prostitute. She had a list of powerful men out of the 4 different apartments just months after she arrived. She was brought to New York through her affair with Harry Alan Towers, a British television producer. And both were charged with operating a sexual blackmail ring in New York which specifically targeted UN diplomats and other men of influence. It also was alleged that JFK was one of her clients, but we don't know that. Before she fled the U.S. in 1961, Novotny left her address book, of course she did, replete with names and contact information of America's rich and powerful with the FBI. For mysterious reasons, the FBI dropped its case against her and Towers and chose to destroy her address book as well as her files on both Novotny and Towers. So the FBI destroyed their evidence. I don't know why that is. The other women linked to both Stephen Ward, they probably destroyed it because they're the ones that made it up. Let's see. Other women linked to Stephen Ward um, was Susie Chang, a former nurse turned model who moved to London at 19. Again, this just has all of the same bells and whistles as the Epstein story. How Chang met Ward is still unknown, though Chang later described Ward as a good friend. So Chang was associated with Ward's close friend and Thursday Club founder Sterling Nahum and lived at the Nail Gwyn house in London, where another woman working for Ward also lived. So that must have been where they put up their prostitutes. Um, Chang was referred to as one of Stephen's girls. She later confirmed that she knew Corbley well. Um, Chang also was alleged to have had sex with JFK. She denied ever having sex with him. And Chang's mother, let's see, hired the former OSS chief William Donovan's law firm to get Chang a visa to the US in 1962, right at the same time that the Profumo affair was happening. So, again, this network of unsavory people. So, the first stories of the Profumo affair emerge in the midst of the Cuban Missile Crisis. So, what better way to screw with the president than to have his name come out in the middle of a crisis that they're going to paint he's a part of some sexual network to discredit him to the US public and internationally. Do you see how this goes? This is Operation Gladio, people. That's exactly what they're describing. This is exactly what they do. So Ivanov attempted to use Ward as a back channel during the crisis. Ivanov and Ward was working with, so they've discredited the two people that could help Kennedy diffuse the situation by running bimbos at them to, so you've got the war guy who's now the whole UK government is falling apart. They just set them up. So, and then you've got the media running through all of this. Let's see what else. Roy Cohen was a longtime close personal friend of Richard Berlin, the top manager of the Hearst newspaper conglomerate, who was printing these crazy stories. Um, Cohen was notorious for using the Hearst newspapers for planting storage for both organized crime and for Hoover. The Profumo affair was probably Corbley's most notable tie to the sex blackmail ring. Years later, Corbley was deeply connected to the so-called Hollywood Madam Heidi Fleiss. So he was another version of Jeffrey Epstein. He just creates these sex honey traps for blackmail. Um, let's see. It says that he has an extensive files. Another important association of Corbley's to sexual blackmail was his connection to Jules Kroll of Kroll and Associates. Kroll employees crediting Corbley for the firm's initial success. Kroll and Associates is long-term known as the CIA of Wall Street, believed by French intelligence to actually be a front company for the CIA. They're critically important when we get to the last days of Robert Maxwell and um, Robert Maxwell's legacy in the United States, which she says we're going to talk about in depth in chapter 15. So, um, the next thing she talks about was the United Dye stock, and the it's um, interesting. It's the last section of this chapter, but I'm just gonna it it basically deals with a lot of the same people. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because it it's important to understand the depth of um, this collaboration with the CIA, regardless of which company it is. This is not one that we're going to have a lot to do with in the future. So I'm not going to spend any time on it. The United Dye entity is just another CIA Georgetown Club with William Buckley, Roy Cohn, and Charles Willoughby from the OSS. A lot of the old OSS people rear their ugly head in this story. Um, and it has ties to the oil companies. So I'm just going to leave it at that. And I'm going to conclude our conversation where we left it because I wanted to spend a lot of time on the JFK to show you guys just exactly how when they don't like a president, you can see clearly what they do to get rid of the presidents. So they formulate the best that they can, either a coup, which is how they brought down the British government, or they kill him, which is what they nothing they did to JFK stuck, kind of like Trump. No matter what they did to try to implicate him, people still loved him. And they were very frustrated with that, no matter who they ran at him or what they did. And all of the setup where supposedly he called off the air support, um, the um, the lies, he just took it and stood right in their face and said, "I'm still going to destroy you." So, let me read over some of the comments. My ears, my gut told me nothing is as it seemed. You're so right. Nothing is as it seems. So, thank you, Bridget, for posting all of these links in here. God bless you, girl. Same thing with Julie. Thank you for posting. Uh, where's Liza? She's not here tonight because I didn't give her a shout out. So y'all go tell her that I gave her a shout out. Um, and yeah, Bridget's got all of the links on there. I really appreciate that. Um, so again, we are building the foundation for the later connections, but you can see all of these sex scandals that we um, have already had. They act like the Jeffrey Epstein one is like the end all be all. It absolutely is not. There are so many of them. And the more research you do, the more you understand just how prolific that type of activity has been. Um, I am in the middle of writing an extensive background paper on the one of them in Europe that had to do with child trafficking as well. And it's gross. And it's basically a part of Operation Gladio. And I just want everybody to understand that all of this stuff um, walks hand in hand, and there's almost nothing that goes on today that you can't overlay Operation Gladio infrastructure on top of and not make it make sense. So if you learn that um, And so I'm gonna bring it back to how I started off the show. After learning about Operation Gladio and doing the reading into, what has gone on in the, um, northern Iraq as part of the Kurdistan, that for those of you that's been with me for a long time, they took an entity on old maps that's called Kurdistan, sectioned it off into 4, different countries after World War II because all they want is forever war. You start reading stories about them creating schools where they take these war-torn orphans and they move them out of their hometowns to these schools, like in Iraq and Syria and Turkey. And then these kids come up missing, and most of them are not um, kept track of because they're orphans and they become human child trafficking victims. And it's all done on purpose. You have wars to protect poppy fields. The war creates refugees. You infiltrate countries with these refugees and you steal the children. You sell them, you use that black money as part of the money laundering, drug sale, money laundering, buy weapons, go off presidents, create coups. It is a vicious circle. And at the hub of all of it is NATO and whoever's occupying the chairs of the current roundtable. And all of these little social clubs, like we were just reading about, are basically the children's table of the round table. You have all of these sub table entities, the Club of Rome, the whatever of 300, I mean, there's tons of them. And those are preparation for them to watch you in order for you to get promoted to the next level. And it it's just mind-boggling going over a book like this after we understand what the network looks like. So, that's why I got so excited, whoever it was, God bless you for recommending that somebody said they would love to go over the One Nation Under Blackmail, and it just, like, blew my mind because it was the having already read it, I knew it was the perfect one for us to use our new skills of Operation Gladio knowledge on top of, and as you see, we're only on chapter 4, and we've already seen in every single chapter, there's elements of Operation Gladio in every single one of them. And I know for a fact that you'll see it through the rest of the book. So, let's see. Chapter 5 is Shades of Gray, and we will do that. I already put out the schedule for this next week, so I will see you then. Thank you for being here. What'd you say? Makes my heart feel better at the slings and arrows they throw at Trump. Oh gosh, yes. And this is my takeaway every single time. Other than Charles de Gaulle, I don't know a single other president that survived besides Trump. And that to me tells me that Trump is here divinely and that he will succeed. And that's why I keep the smile on my face. No matter how bad the stuff is that we find, it actually does exactly the opposite. It doesn't make me depressed. It make number 1, we know it now. Number 2, we can fight against it. And number 3, Trump knew all of this and did what he did. So how can you not be optimistic? That's where I'm at. Okay. Again, thank you for being here, and I will see you next time.